I think the United States, our citizenry is more engaged in Afghanistan than it has been since the war began. Our politicians on both sides are now paying attention in a way that they haven't for 19 years. But there's always a danger here that the Democrats will simply try to relitigate President Trump's treaty and President George W. Bush's invasion and change of mission, and the Republicans will just try to relitigate this disaster that we're ongoing right now. And people aren't going to try and dig down to, well, how about the military that lied this entire time? How about the politicians and the presidents who lied this whole time? How about the deep state operations that leaks to the press that the Russians, for some reason, paying the Taliban to do what the Taliban were already doing, and therefore we must go to war forever? How about the military lying to President Trump about the actual numbers of people who were there? Or the different generals who came in and said our choices are to nuke them to death, to have complete withdrawal and disaster, or to keep doing exactly what we're doing like Stanley McChrystal did. This needs to be investigated, it seems, from top to bottom for 20 full years, and just to come away with a clear-eyed view of why it took 3 administrations intending to withdraw to finally withdraw, and why it had to go like this. If the generals possibly even sabotaged this for some kind of result that's now out of their control, because they've always been pushing this. Either we're in charge here and the politicians stay out, or there's complete disaster. We have a chance to the American people, it seems, to actually figure this out. Possibly. I think we'll squander it. And I hope that we don't.
Yeah, well, I have a few points. One is that the President Trump, unlike the presidents before him and the current president after him, did not uncritically accept the ludicrous assertions of the Pentagon and the broader foreign policy establishment about the capabilities of the Afghan military or the resilience of the Afghan government. And so his whole peace process was predicated on a realistic understanding of the situation. And it was Biden, again, who accepted the establishment, I guess you would say, fiction about both the military and the government. And that is why he, again, abandoned the peace process, the conditions-based peace process that President Trump had set up. So that's one important point. But I think that an important piece of evidence in all of this is that when President Trump established these red lines for the Taliban, there was not a single American killed by the Taliban from early 2020.
18 months or so.
Right, yes. And that shows you that when people understand there's going to be real deadly consequences, that you can, in fact, control their behavior. This is a fairly ancient principle of understanding how to deal with a merciless opposition. And so, again, I really want to reiterate that, and I'll get to your broader historical point in a second, but if President Biden had laid down red lines that he was willing to enforce with the Taliban, we would have never had to evacuate our embassy in the first place, or take down the flags, or burn the flags, or have the air base surrendered, or anything else to that effect. Because the Taliban wouldn't have dreamed of taking those actions if they really believe there's a realistic chance that their organization was going to be decapitated. Because, you know, once they actually make a move and they actually have to start moving on Kabul, they become vulnerable at that point to execution.
I'm surprised they took the risk in the first place. If I was the Taliban leadership and the Americans were withdrawing, I would say, hold on, they're almost gone. We can kill everyone as soon as they are.
That shows you their measure of Joe Biden. But the flip side of that point is that when we have the military assets and the air assets and the drone assets that we have, and you're still in country, and they start marching on Kabul, they're right out there in the open. You can execute them all. And so my point is that the fact that those threats weren't made, those red lines weren't drawn, that's the reason why everything happened the way that it did. So it's two things, to underscore it cleanly. It's both the backwardsness of the evacuation, i.e. taking out the military first, your people second.
It doesn't make any sense.
But it's also not even doing the preliminary step of saying to the Taliban beforehand, these are the confines that we're placing your activity in. upon which our withdrawal is contingent. If you do any of these things that we tell you not to do, the withdrawal stops and we kill you. It's very simple. That did not happen, clearly. But let me address your broader questions about the Afghan war, the war in Afghanistan. So obviously, there needs to be a cleaning of house at DOD and the Pentagon, clearly. There are systemic issues that both have to do with a failure of military strategy and a failure of emphasis. The failure of military strategy is pretty obvious after 20 years in Afghanistan. The failure of emphasis is epitomized by General Milley's testimony in front of Congress, in which the issue that got him most exercised in his entire testimony was a defense of critical race theory, which is a fairly remarkable thing when you think about it. That is not just the position, but this is what really got him. This is what really
That's
got
what
him
he's excited about when he wakes up in the morning.
Yes. And so I think that one of the things that would surprise a lot of people is the extent to which our military has become the latest organization to become part of the woke progressive machine.
They're just as broken, it turns out. In America, the hospitals are broken. The police and the legal system seems to be broken. The society's broken. Marriage is broken. Families are broken. Politics are broken. Newspapers broken. So is the military. I don't know why I thought that they might be.
Well,
immune.
the progressive march through our institutions has been methodical, and it has been very strategic. So, in other words, they didn't start by trying to take over the military and to take over the upper echelons of law enforcement. The upper echelon is being, the police chiefs, the prosecutors, Department of Justice, etc. Because obviously your beat cops are every bit as pro law and order as they've ever been, but it's the leadership ranks, especially the politically appointed side. But they didn't start there, right? They started with journalism. They started with academia. They started with the non-law enforcement federal bureaucracy. Then they moved on to your corporate boardrooms and obviously Hollywood entertainment, right? And so the last part of their march to the institutions was military and law enforcement. And we're living through the results of that right now. It's fairly terrifying. At home with rising crime rates and abroad with the disaster in Afghanistan. But there's a few other points I think that need to be made here. The last truly successful, unquestionably successful, U.S. military occupation was in Japan, obviously after the end of World War II. And there's a few things that have to be said about that. One is that the general in charge of that, MacArthur, did not try to impose an American way of living onto Japan. He was keenly interested in Japanese history, Japanese culture, and having it be an occupation that honored the Japanese way of doing things. It's one of the reasons why one of his best decisions that we never learned from in the Middle East wars was, of course, keeping the Emperor of Japan. Obviously in a symbolic role, and obviously renouncing his divinity, but as a symbol of Japanese heritage and pride. He understood the importance of that. He understood the importance of having the appearance of the Japanese emperor endorsing the occupation, the appearance of it, with the kinds of photography that was released to the public, as well as the powerful images of him standing next to the emperor, towering over him. Right? MacArthur, this larger-than-life figure. And so there was no desire that I can see in the war in Afghanistan to try to understand the culture, heritage, and history of Afghanistan and planning a government, or learning anything from the horribly failed Soviet occupation of Afghanistan.
There was some level, it seems like, in the American forces of unforgivable acceptance of the brutalities of certain aspects of the culture, like the bachi-bazi, the boys that were raped by the officers, and then other ones where they just had no respect at all with the centralized government and a centralized army. It's like people can't say the British were just classic imperialists, and they were, but they did it generally right in that they knew everything about the people that they were colonizing, that they were occupying, and they acted accordingly, and they thought that they were a force for good. So they played off the different tribes. They worked with them for better and for worse, sometimes for worse. but they at least understood it. And
Part of the problem, I think, is that there's a deep self-consciousness on the part of the American military in never being seen as an occupying force.
which is so ridiculous.
Right. And so that leads you to, and of course, that you think that stops the Taliban from calling you an occupying force?
And that's
right?
what we've worked.
Right. And so, but from that self-consciousness, I think stems a lot of these mistakes. In other words, we are so eager to say, hey, we're just here to help, right? We're just here to help, to support you guys, that we don't actually take ownership of the fact that, no, we are the occupying force in Afghanistan, and with that comes the obligation to learn everything there is to know about this country, its people, its history, its traditions, its way of living. I mean, the history of Afghanistan is extraordinarily complex. In the 20th century, they've had kings, they've had presidents, they've had a Soviet occupation, they've had civil wars between warring Mujahideen tribes, they have had obviously a Taliban government for 5 years, and they had American-backed government for 20 years. It's an extraordinarily complex history. And again, if you say we are the occupying force, then you appreciate the obligation that comes with that.
It's clear-eyed, at least.
Right, yes, it's clear. Just, again, like, MacArthur in Japan had a mission, the American occupation of Japan. And success was creating a system of government in Japan of which the Japanese would feel a personal ownership stake in. So that obviously never happened in Afghanistan, and that's American hubris, it's ignorance, and again,
it's just thinking we're better than our ancestors, and it turns out we're not. Right. We're still human.
And it's also, and part of the hubris, again, is believing that American-style government is universally desired everywhere. Now, I do want to make this point because this is, I think, an issue that is misunderstood. I'd be remiss if we didn't address it, which is, I think that one of the symptoms of our failure is that we did create this system whereby the people that we put in government positions were then taken out of the country and moved to America. And, and this is an area where I'm glad we can talk about in the podcast, because we can just slow everything down and try to take some of the heat out of it and think about it logically. So Congress created a program to identify the best government workers and then move them all to the United States of America. And we did this for 20 years. So the people that were put to the front of the line were the people who had developed, who demonstrated the most value to the American government in the nation-building exercise, whether you like it or don't like it. And you have to ask yourself if that's really a smart strategy to say that all the people that are demonstrating the most value to us are all going to be taken out of this country and moved to our country, right? And then we're surprised when at the end of 20 years that the government is paper thin and can't stand and can't hold. And so, again, this is the failure of DOD, because I've been in many meetings with DOD where they would say, in 2017, I remember a meeting where DOD leadership was insistent that we had to substantially increase the number of people we were taking out of Afghanistan, long before there was any talk of withdrawal or anything like that. And people other than me made the point that that had experience in these matters, that we were basically going to be depriving the country of the very people that they would need to have an ownership stake in the government.
It's a brain drain.
Right, exactly. And so we've been doing this to Afghanistan for 20 years. And ultimately, and this is the point that I think really has to sink in on this, ultimately, if the people in the country that are working for the U.S. government don't want to stay in the country, I'm not talking about like this month, I mean in 2003 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, for 20 years, they don't want to stay in the country, at what point should the military say to themselves, if all the people we're working with don't want to stay here, what chance does this nation-building program really even have?
It's almost like these are the kind of ideas that have been come up by think tank people, and by all the eggheads here in Washington D.C., all the university people. Sohrab Ahmari over at the New York Post had a great series of recollections that he sent out the other day about talking to a senior think tank. I think it was president, and she said that she had her whole plan for solving the Middle East. And he was reading her report, and he looked at all the sources, and they were all English language first sources written by Washington D.C. and New York City think tanks. And he thought, you don't have a single Arabic source, you don't have a single Persian source. You want to solve this? I'm not even seeing Jewish sources, Israeli sources in here. What are you talking about? But with your broader mission with the America First Legal Foundation, it seems like you're one of those folks who's trying to take it back and halt and cause as much trouble and roadblocks and holdups as you can for this administration's largely failed policies, and the think tankers' largely failed policies. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you guys are hot on outside of just this television display we're watching?
Yeah, so our organization launched only a few months ago, and already we've been involved in many of the most important legal fights in the country. We have successfully litigated against two of Biden's signature equity initiatives, and equity is the left's competing concept meant to replace and supplant equality, right? So equity is to equality what, say, left is to right or up is to down, right? These are exact opposites. Equality is all people are treated the same under law and in life and in justice. And they have the same rights, they have the same privileges, they have the same freedoms, they have the same securities. Equity is certain people based on intrinsic characteristics, race, religion, gender, ethnicity, ancestry, will be given specific advantages or specific disadvantages. And of course, this is most insidious when it's done by the government, because then you have the power of the government being used to formally discriminate against some Americans based on, say, their race.
It's equality of results over equality of opportunity.
And then to benefit others solely based on their race. So we filed lawsuit against two of Biden's signature equity initiatives. And for a young organization as ours is, to be able to freeze two of Biden's signature initiatives in one of the critical battlefronts of American politics today, American policy today, which is this whole equity, critical race theory agenda, is a really phenomenal achievement. Additionally, we've been involved in many of the most important immigration battles in the country. We are the outside counsel for the state of Louisiana in its lawsuit with Texas against the abolish ICE memos that the Biden administration has issued, and we just got a favorable ruling from the district court today in that case.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We are also, and that's a very, very important one, to do with the effective destruction of ICE by memorandum, so that if you're here in the country legally inside the United States, you're functionally immune from deportation, including virtually the entire criminal illegal alien population. We are the outside counsel for the state of Texas in this lawsuit against catch and release on the border, and we'll be issuing an amended filing at some point in the next few days in that lawsuit. We are advising a number of states behind the scenes based on our unique expertise as senior administration officials and also senior officials working in this issue area on those states' litigation and a variety of other immigration-related lawsuits, including, for example, the state of Arizona. We have lawsuits as well on issues to do with transgender agenda, the transgender agenda from the Biden administration, which is, of course, one of the most important issues in our country today, which is the idea of erasing biological sex. And we are involved in fighting against critical race theory in a number of different ways, and also pursuing zealous oversight of the administration in all of its various overreaches. And so we are really a legal battle tank against unconstitutional overreach. And our early results have been even greater than I would have hoped.
Where can people keep up to date? Do you have newsletters? Where can people keep up to date in your work, contribute to it, or follow you guys on social media or elsewhere?
We are available for well, I should say, the best place to go is aflegal.org. That's aflegal.org. But we're available on all the major social media platforms, be it Rumble, Getter, Twitter, etc. And I encourage everyone to check us out on all those platforms. But your starting point should be go to aflegal.org. That's aflegal.org. And you can see all of our latest cases, all of our lawsuits, all of our FOIA requests, all of our latest courtroom battles, all available on the website. You can sign up there for our newsletter as well, too, and become a regular follower of everything that we're doing.
And where can people follow you on Twitter? Because I learn a lot following you online, and I'm terrible at Twitter. But I check in on yours, and you have some great screeds on what the conservatives should be, what a conservative platform should be, what people should be focused on, and who's full of it.
Thank you. Well, I am available for anyone who wants to follow me at Stephen M. That's at Stephen M. So STEPHENM on Twitter. And I'm going to be getting an account soon on Getter as well, so stay tuned for that. But yes, you're right. I try as best I can to break down the news of the day, whether it's what's happening in Afghanistan, what's happening on the border, what's happening in domestic policy, what's happening in the budget. Based on my experience having been both a senior official in the Trump administration as well as before that, a congressional staffer for a number of years.
Well, that's great. Thanks very much for joining us today, Stephen. It's been wonderful to catch up with you after a couple of years. Of course, I'm sure you didn't even get to see your new wife when you were working for the White House very often. And so those are long hours. President Trump got up early and worked late. Thanks for joining us again.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks so much.